Even after it was legal, people still, looked at you sideways, and it's very odd. Children being out and about with their parents, during school hours was still kind of a curiosity.
I wish that it wasn't needed today. We'd like to think that we're free in every way.
Yeah.
But as we have seen over the last many, many years, there are people and organizations and parts of our government that are trying to take control over the things that we can and cannot do with our children. And so you talked about how there are social workers who might just show up at your door. And I like to think, we live in Oklahoma. We live in a very free state. It's free to homeschool here. We don't report to anybody. And so people take advantage of things like that. And there are states that are not nearly as free as ours. But whether you live in Oklahoma or New York, it doesn't really matter. We still need to protect those freedoms, but we also need to be prepared and ready. So talk about, let's start there where, a social worker shows up at your door. And I would love to think that this is never going to happen, but it could. It's not likely, but it could happen. What are some things that we can do to prepare ourselves and our families as homeschoolers? And really quickly, I want to back up because you said you're a homeschool grad. I don't know what it was like when you were growing up, but when you were a kid, I'm assuming it was a little bit more secretive homeschooling. You didn't probably go out to the grocery store in the middle of the day like I do with my kids now. People would question you, question your mom, why are you not in school? So maybe back up a little bit, talk about what it used to be, talk about what it is today, and then why we need to protect those freedoms and how we can prepare ourselves.
Well, it was illegal for the first few years. So that made it to where, weren't really advertising it very broadly. Keep the window shades closed and things like that until school lets out. Actually, the first time I ever went to court was when I was, I think I was 9 or 10 years old.
Oh, wow.
My mom woke my brother and I up, and our neighbor who also homeschooled and her son, and we drove to the Texas Supreme Court in the middle of the night to get there. It was like 4 or 5 hours away. Drove there to go to the Texas Leaper case that was being argued there, which was a case to determine whether or not homeschooling would be legal or not. And thankfully, that was great to go and listen to that case as a child.
Yeah.
And now, the court ultimately did decide that yes, homeschooling is legal in Texas. But it was a very different world, back then. And even after it was legal, people still, looked at you sideways, and it's very odd, that children being out and about with their parents, during school hours was still kind of a curiosity at the very least to a lot of people.
Yeah.
So it's a very different world we live in now. On the subject of parental rights, kind of beyond homeschooling, what's interesting is that you think, well, I live in Texas, or you live in Oklahoma, or other folks live in these red states, conservative states, and like, well, I don't have to worry about that here. Just like we have, we sometimes go to Florida for different homeschool conferences, and people there are like, well, I don't need parental rights defense. I have DeSantis as my governor, and or people are like, oh, well, Trump is now the president, so we don't have to worry about that. And what's interesting is that the states that are actually the most aggressive on CPS issues are oftentimes the most conservative states, and the states that are the least aggressive are sometimes the most liberal states. And so it's obviously, the more conservative states are going to be more law and order. We hate child abuse, and that's great. But that ends up a lot of times meaning that way too much discretion and authority is given to CPS, and they end up, getting involved in people's lives that they really shouldn't.
Yeah.
And it's why across the country, studies show that 37% of children will be part of a CPS investigation by the time they turn 18.
Wow.
That's the data in America as a whole. So more than 1 out of 3 children, will be part of a CPS investigation. A lot of people, you think that number may be high, but the issue is the reason you don't hear about a lot of those. And I think most people do hear about some of those things. But people aren't advertising that. They're not like, hey, guess what I got accused of? And going on social media like, hey, I'm being investigated for child abuse. So people aren't really open and advertising it, but it's happening across the country.
Yeah.
And the other odd thing about that is, when someone gets arrested for something, you think, yeah, they probably did it. Yes, there's a presumption of innocence till they're proven guilty as far as legally, but we all think like, yeah, they probably did it. With CPS allegations, it's actually the opposite. By their own data, over 90% of reports are unfounded.
Mhm.
Over 83% of investigations are unfounded. So you have a lot of innocent families that end up with social workers knocking at their door that haven't done anything wrong. So
Yeah.
that's why it's a big issue.
Yeah. We have a friend who she delivered her baby at home. She's a homeschool mom. She delivered her third child at home and had a family member call CPS on her because she didn't like that she had delivered her baby at home, without having, a doctor there, and that she was
Right.
homeschooling her kids and taking control of her family.
How dare
And
you?
so, right. And so one day, she just had a CPS worker show, and it was completely unfounded. Of course, the CPS worker came in and was like, you're fine. There's absolutely nothing to be concerned of here. But it was so shocking to that family and really traumatic for them because it just makes you somewhat fearful. Homeschool Insights is sponsored by CTC Math. If you're looking for a great online math program, visit ctcmath.com and try it for free. For more great homeschool inspiration and resources, listen to the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday.